Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and we're finishing things up with a trip to McHollywood. Yeah! All right, guys, season finale. It's going to be a while. Okay, so before we get going on this one, I just want to finish up with a few final thoughts on Mervyn Touche and the possibility of a hidden noble or royal bloodline that could be roaming around out there doing who knows what at this time, right? And how that's really opened things up for me, and what kind of part they could play in the saga of the Hidden Hand. All right, I mean, my mind boggles, right? And especially once I factor in the motto of the Baron Audleys, which is something that I forgot to put in the last episode. And the Baron Audley's motto was, or is, "Je le tiens," right? I hold it. What exactly are the Audleys holding, right? Is it the massive wealth and property they accumulate with all they're marrying up, or could it be the secret of the royal bloodlines that culminates with that missing baby, right? I mean, it just could be, right? And could that baby have been spirited away to Ulster in the care of the brothers Poe, right? And as I've said about them in the past, their individual stories, what little is presented anyway, doesn't seem as important as who they're associated with. But that position has changed for me a little, because in the Touche Pussycat episode, I mentioned that the Touche and the Mervyn families only get the one brief mention in the Bewley biography, right? Establishing how William gets to settle in County Tyrone. Well, it turns out that I was wrong, right? Because in the very next chapter on Thomas Poe, it says that Thomas Poe settles in County Fermanagh as a tenant of one Thomas Blennerhassett, who of course I looked into a little bit, but didn't find enough on to pull him into the story. Not yet anyway, right? But Blennerhassett here is married to Deborah Mervyn, who is Captain James Mervyn's sister. James, of course, being the man that William gets his land from. So tangentially connecting the two brothers and where they settle in the plantation of Ulster, and Thomas in Fermanagh and William in Tyrone, right? But then it says this: one may conjecture that it was through some connection or friendship with the Mervyn family that William and Thomas Poe, and, as will be seen presently, their brother Anthony, were led to settle in Ireland. And so now here we have it, a direct connection to the Poe and Mervyn and Touche families. I mean, they absolutely knew each other, hands down, right? But if you were to ask me now, if there was some plot to spirit this royal bloodline baby away to Ulster that was orchestrated by Dr. Leonard Poe, I would think that we're really onto something here. Right? There's no doubt about it, and I love to see Lenny. Anytime I get to put him up there, it makes me happy. Right? And could Lenny have been involved in a plot to plant the royal baby in Ulster? Right? And you have to remember that he was a court physician for over 25 years, servicing both King James I and Charles I, but he was in the Elizabethan court as well with Robert Devereux for at least 10 or 15 years before that, right? And who knows what secrets they could have shared between each other, being best buds the way they were, about what was going on in Ulster. Right? And to make things, of course, even more curious, is nothing definite is known as to Lenny's early life, right? But we do know his death date. He dies in February or March 1630 or 31. I mean, they don't even know when he died, right? I mean, this is a full year's difference. Imagine what someone could accomplish in a year if they were well connected. I mean, they could do a lot of things, right? And so since nothing is known about his early life, we don't really know how old he was here in 1630 or 31, but I think it's pretty safe to suppose that he was probably very similar in age to Robert Devereux, who was born on the 10th of November, 1565. So that would put Lenny at about 65, or dare I say 66 years of age, and coincidentally enough, that's when Mervyn's trial is, in that same 1630, 1631 time frame, being executed in May 1631 as he was. And to thicken this plot, we know that William Poe is over in Ireland as early as 1628, when he marries Frances Sedborough, daughter of one John Sedborough of Mount Sedborough, County Fermanagh, right? And so again, the timing is there. Right, so John Sedborough, he's one of these super rich muckety-muck members of Parliament, right? And the Sedborough story is really interesting, especially in connection with Poe here, but it's not interesting enough to make this episode, right? Maybe somewhere down the line. But if there really is some bloodline baby out there, which was alleged to have been born, a few years before Mervyn Touche's trial, at least that's what the testimony of Henry Skipwith seems to imply, right? Well, then the timing is there, right? I mean, it's just really unbelievable, right? And so one last footnote on Lenny is that he is buried or was buried at the Christ Church in London, right? And that which is conveniently enough burned to the ground in the Great Fire of London, 1666, eliminating his remains and the remains of who knows who else, right? Really unbelievable when you think about that. What they don't have to prove anymore because it was burned to the ground. and so in conclusion, I believe there really could be something to this story, but it clearly needs more work, and I just can't give it right now, but maybe someday, because it really changed the whole story of the brothers Poe as I had originally worked it out, right? And so I'm going to have to breeze through them real quick before I wrap this up. And so in short, all three brothers serve in various capacities in the parliamentary efforts, and in some cases, some serve the crown as well, which is, of course, a very interesting part of this story. And I mentioned, I think, early on in the show, the flip-flopping that gets to go on, and, no one seems to really get punished for this. And in often cases, they get rewarded because, all three Poe brothers are awarded large tracts of land in Ireland after their service. And so William and Thomas, after their service, they go into the cattle industry, perhaps connecting them to King Meats of Meat City fame, right? Who knows? I don't know, right? But, Anthony here, he dies fairly young, and his family is awarded the property in County Louth after his death, right? But there is enough of it that the family dubs it Poe's Court, right? And this was apparently located along the River Dee, right? Which just so happens to run from the County Cavan, where Edgar's paternal family emigrates to America from, and more on them in a little bit, but all the way to County Louth, where Anthony Poe's family settles, right? And it was here that my initial investigation derailed. Once I started looking into these counties in depth and connecting them to the O'Carroll land, and conversely to the ancient history and mythology of Ireland, especially, all the river gods and everything, with the River Dee running between these counties the way it does, and so there, there's going to be more on this whenever I get to my History of Ireland episode, right? But I want to wrap this one up with Thomas Poe here, because there seems to be some controversy over whether or not it's Thomas Poe of Tipperary or it's the immortal David Poe, Scottish Covenanter, in his mask, who is the progenitor of the David Poe of Dring line, the line. This is Edgar Allan's paternal great-great-great-grandfather, right? And, so there seems to be some confusion between, exactly who he comes from, right? But it's his sons who move over to America, especially John Poe here, right? And, because this would be Edgar Allan's great-great-grandfather, who moves to, of course, the Manor of Mask, or Gettysburg, as it's known today, right? But the story takes an interesting turn with who John Poe's wife is, when he moves over to Manor of Mask, right? He's married to one Jane McBride, right? And it turns out that her father may or may have not been this big-time covenanting John McBride, right? Who in 1644 preaches and signs the Solemn League of Covenant, this call to arms of the Scottish Covenanters. Right? And of all places, Hollywood, from April 7th to April 9th, 1644. And they say this was just discovered in the collection of the Ulster Museum. Hey, I'm sure, just discovered. It's new. It's original. Are you kidding me? Hollywood? As if this story wasn't Hollywood enough, with all the connections I've been making from Robin Hood to Walt Disney to the American Revolution to Gettysburg. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Right? And I don't want to forget about Holmfirth, right? Which was the first Hollywood to make motion pictures, and that's not very far from Nottinghamshire, where all that monkey business was taking place, right? And even more incredible than that is I found not only one, but two Hollywoods in Ireland, right? So the first and most likely signing place of the Solemn League and Covenant is the Hollywood in County Wicklow. And here it is on the map, right? I say most likely because it's part of the pilgrimage of St. Kevin, right? Whose most famous miracle seems to being allowing a blackbird to nest in his hands. Blackbird, ravens are blackbirds, And so St. Kevin, he was around, this miracle aside, he was around in the 6th century, right? And there are a few places of interest along this pilgrimage of his, right? And one is that there's this St. Kevin's chair, right? And there's also St. Kevin's cave, right? And so here they are. This is St. Kevin's chair. Apparently he sat there or something. Right? And here's the cave he lived in. Look at this cave on the side of this cliff here or whatever. Right? You don't get a close-up of it here. this old man, this barefooted old man climbed down into this cave and lived, and he sat and he did his thinking here. I wonder what kind of thinking he did, the type of constitutionals that took place there. And, at one time early on in the series, I threatened to do an episode about the barefoot monks, including St. Columbus here, who pretty much brings Christianity to Scotland, right? And he also, vanquishes the Loch Ness Monster. He's one of the first recorded sightings, right? And he vanquishes the foul beast, just another amazing connection that I can bring into this story through Edgar Allan Poe. The Loch Ness Monster. Where is Sasquatch? He's coming. I know he is. And someday I hope to get to that story of the monks, the two monks story is another one, but another great story lost to the proverbial back burner, right? But again, maybe someday. But the other and more interesting to me, Hollywood, is located in County Down, right? And here it is, right? And I love their coat of arms, flanked by these two giant stags, right? It doesn't have the hand on it like some of the other counties in Ulster do, but it does have this right arm jutting out of the crown up top. And that hand is holding the crook, which a snake has wrapped itself around. Right? And the crook, of course, being that pharaonic symbol for kingship, right? That's unbelievable. All right, they got a boat, so there's commerce of the sea. We got a salmon. We got the wheat. And their motto in Latin down here, I looked it up, it's something like, without work, there is nothing, something like that, right? And one interesting thing about the County Down, is that it's in this, and here's Hollywood located on the County Down. So it's like right at the tip of this bay here, or whatever this would be. I haven't looked into that. But one really interesting thing about it is it's part of those colonies that were privately planted, the Orange, who was privately planting this? What was the need for privacy here? That's the definition is given. They're just privately planted. Who did this land belong to? I'm sure it's out there in the record somewhere. It just makes me curious. I just haven't looked that up. All right, and this Hollywood has a couple of really amazing things going for it. First is that it was named after the Holy Wood, the name the Normans gave to the woodland surrounding the monastery of Saint Lazarin, son of Nasca, right? And the Irish name for Hollywood is Ard McNasca, meaning high ground of Mac Nazca. Like, wait a minute, what? High ground of Nazca? Like in Peru with the Nazca lines? Are you kidding me? What kind of coincidence is that? How could that be? Why hasn't anyone thought about this before? That is nuts. Unbelievable. Especially when I get into like the ancient mythology and the history of Ireland. It's freaking crazy. Right? But there's more, right? There's more, right? In downtown Hollywood, Hollywood is famous for its Maypole at the crossroads in the center of town. Its origin is uncertain, but according to local folklore, it dates from 1700, when a Dutch ship is said to have run aground on the shore nearby, and the crew erected the broken mast to show their appreciation of the assistance offered to them by the townsfolk. The Maypole is still used for dancing at the annual May Day Fair. I also love here that it says, nearly as famous as the Maypole is the adjacent Maypole Bar, locally known as Ned's or Cardi's. Almost as famous as the Maypole itself, right? But so I wanted to find out about Maypoles, right? Because I thought that was really kind of amazing, right? And so it turns out no one really knows how the Maypole practice started, right? The consensus seems to be that it was German paganism, right? And that it represents Yggdrasil, the world tree, or the Axis Mundi, the axis of the world, or of course it could just represent that old standby of the phallus worship, although I didn't write it on this slide here. They appear to have been primarily located on or near ley lines, right? And that on the right of spring festivals of May Day and the White Sun Summer Rod Festival, and I love the name White Sun. They dance around the Maypole, right? It's a big thing. And I know I've seen the Maypole dance before, I'm sure in some movie like, perhaps The Wicker Man or something, right? But, I wanted to take a look at it while I was doing my research here. And so when I started looking at them, I was like, geez, I'd really love to see this from above. And I did find one that had a few very short snippets of aerial footage, really fast, right? So I tried my best to edit some of it together so I could get my thoughts around what I'm seeing here, right? And then we're going to wrap this one up, okay? And so here we go with my Maypole video. And so I just want to stop it here real quick to look at the pattern that's developing at the top of this as they dance around with these ribbons. I'll be damned if this isn't some form of somatic or energy signature that's being represented here, right? And if these maypoles are put in at certain cross sections of ley lines, and the electricity that could be conducted, or whatever energy could be conducted through these maypoles, and I think that's what this dance represents looking at it from above. I mean, this is the energy signature of the Maypole, right? All right. So maybe I gave you a little too much of that. I don't know. But that's definitely what I see happening here when I look at this. And, I thought that was really sort of an amazing connection to make, with the ritual practice of these maypole dances, Right? Because regardless of which Hollywood I choose, there has to be some sort of synchronicity going on here with all these Hollywood connections that the Mud City Paradigm Puzzle Tree is showing me, right? Right, because let's not forget that there is a Hollywood in Maryland, right? And it has a deep history. St. John Francis Regis Catholic Church was there, 1690. The nationally renowned Sotterley Plantation on the banks of the Pawtuxet River, right? It was founded in 1703 by this James Bowles, right, who exchanges it to the Maryland Governor George Plater, who through in the 20th century gives it to this Louisa Satterley, who is the daughter of J.P. Morgan. Right? Make of that what you will. Right? And it says that, that it was also home to this recently demolished Resurrection Manor. I think it's interesting that the Resurrection Manor was demolished, right? Which was built in 1640 by Thomas Cornwallis, the grandfather of General Lord Cornwallis, who surrendered to George Washington at the Battle of Yorktown. And now I can't remember, I want to say it was the Hair of the Dog episode, maybe, all those years ago that I first found Hollywood in Maryland. But, I do talk about this stuff before, and it was this kind of connection with the Cornwallis family being in Maryland as part of the earliest settlers, and that being the same family that surrenders to George Washington, really kind of clued me in as to how staged the American Revolutionary War could be, right? And, so it's just crazy the way all these connections are coming, because not only that, in Hollywood, they have, but also in this Hollywood, there are branch offices of Northrop Grumman, and, just Google them, and see what they're all about if you don't know. There's also a training and conference center for the engineers attached to the nearby Pawtuxet River Naval Air Station, right? So involved with the Navy out of Hollywood as well, with all of this Hollywood craziness, connecting Holmfirth maybe to, Disney and Shakespeare, or is that Roger Manners? Or maybe it was Mr. Top Hat, Francis Bacon, who was really Shakespeare. To Poe's actor parents. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. The great bard is credited with writing, and the modern world has been perfectly staged, right? And it's hard to find better evidence than by seeing the way that this story connects to the present day, right? I mean, it's been unbelievable on that front too, right? Because our controllers have used the concept of history to stage it. And it's no coincidence that the play this line is from is called As You Like It, right? Because don't we like it? Don't we love our movies and our television, way more than we love our history books, right? Especially when TV and television can tell us what to do and to think, right? Conditioning us to accept what we're told, right? I mean, and there's plenty of evidence to be found just by seeing the way this story connects to the present day. Right? And that's not to suggest that these things aren't filled with lies, because I certainly believe that they are, but I think you get my point. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? And so with that, I'm calling a wrap on season 3 of Mud City. I didn't get as far as I would have hoped to. I really kind of thought this whole Poe thing would be, just like a 4 or 5 episode thing. I did not see all of this coming. And I think there's a much grander, a much larger story to tell here. And, maybe I might pursue other ways to tell it as well. But I'm very proud of the work that I've done this year. And, looking into Edgar Allan Poe's family history has been very illuminating for me. And I hope you all enjoyed yourselves a fraction of the amount that I did bringing it to you, because that would mean you had fun with me on this leg of the journey, right? And in the past, I have been able to squeeze in a couple of episodes out of my summer, but this year there are big changes afoot for me personally, so I don't see that happening this year. But who knows? Time and Inspirato may team up and make that possible. And so one last big thank you to everyone that has watched or listened or subbed, liked, or commented this season. I love you all, right? And remember, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? And so until season 4, guys, cheers.